What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I am Daniel Oyefusi. Thanks so much for tuning in. And man, it was a busy week in the NFL on Tuesday. All the initial attention on the 4 p.m. deadline to use the franchise tag, but that was quickly overshadowed by some quarterback news. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers announcing that he was staying with the Packers for at least one more year, and then the surprise trade of Russell Wilson from the Seahawks to the Broncos. But this is a Dolphins podcast, and the Miami Dolphins were in the news cycle on Tuesday. They used the franchise tag on tight end Mike Gesicki, so we'll talk about that. This is the first pod since the end of the NFL scouting combine. I spent the week out in Indianapolis, got to talk to Mike McDaniel, Chris Greer, various coaches, agents, and some contemporaries in the field. So we're going to talk about that, as well as obviously, the performances from some of the draft prospects that were out there. And then we're also going to look forward to the start of free agency. It's quickly approaching, really next week, in fact, 4 p.m. March 16th. That's the start of the new league year, start of free agency, a lot of deals, contracts going to be flying around. So we're going to look at what's in store for the Dolphins. But first, like I said, we're going to talk about the news of the day on Tuesday for the Dolphins, which was them placing the franchise tag on tight end Mike Gesicki. This was definitely a move that was expected, or definitely it was, one that we all thought could and maybe would happen. Chris Greer at the scouting combine said all options were on the table, which included using the franchise tag. And ultimately, they used it on Gesicki over defensive end Emmanuel Ogbah, who was also slated to hit free agency. There were a lot of questions about Mike Gesicki's fit and kind of his future with this team, given the hiring of Mike McDaniel and what that meant in terms of offensive philosophy. We all know that he's bringing in a zone running scheme that is really predicated and, really puts a lot of focus and importance on tight end blocking. Mike Gesicki, you've talked about it a lot. I've written about it a lot. He doesn't have, a sterling reputation as a blocker. So there were some very fair questions as to does he really fit in this scheme? But in talking to Mike McDaniel and talking to Chris Greer at the combine, they both really temper concerns and are really pushing their belief that they think that there's a role and there's a fit for him. McDaniel specifically said that he's worked with a lot of tight ends who have the same skill set as Mike Gesicki. They might not be great blockers, but they're really versatile pass catchers. And he's somebody who thinks that the first thing you should look at a player is what they can do and what they cannot do. So as it stands right now, Mike Gesicki is a Miami Dolphin for the 2022 season, which I know is exciting for a lot of fans. The Dolphins and Gesicki side will have up until July 15th to come to terms on a long-term deal. If they can't do it by then, he's going to play on this tag, which is roughly about $11 million. That's $10.9 million exactly, which I think is a really, really nice value for Mike Gesicki and, where he stands kind of and where he ranks among tight ends. When you look at some of the recent deals that have been given out to tight ends, Mike Gesicki, his floor was definitely way more than $10.9 million. Last year, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry signing deals with the New England Patriots that are worth roughly about $12.5 million. Dallas Goedert with the Philadelphia Eagles. Last November, he signs an extension that's worth about $14 million. So Mike Gesicki was definitely going to get his money. Somebody was going to pay him like one of the better pass catching tight ends in the NFL. Right now, he'll have to settle for the franchise tag, but the hope is that, for him, definitely that he can get a long-term deal that pays him out a little bit more. I know that there's also some questions about whether, Mike Gesicki will actually even contest this tight end designation, just given the fact that he lines up out wide and in the slot so much as opposed to tight and in line to be used as a blocking tight end. I know that there's various stats on, how often and what percentage he lines up in certain spots. I know looking at NFL next gen stats, he lines up out wide and in the slot roughly 79% of the time. So he's, in name, he's a tight end, but he's definitely being used as a wide receiver in terms of, his alignment and being out wide and running routes and whatnot. It's an interesting question. Will Mike Gesicki contest his designation? Because there is a real disparity in terms of the franchise tag amount for tight ends and wide receivers. Like I said, for tight ends, it's $10.9 million. But for wide receivers, that's $18.4 million. So that's a legitimate amount of money, to potentially dispute. There is a history and a precedent for a tight end disputing, their tight end designation. In 2015, the New Orleans Saints gave Jimmy Graham the franchise tag. And if you remember, Jimmy Graham was really not a tight end at all. They were using him like a wide receiver. He was a big bodied, framed receiver, a tight end who they split out wide. He would run routes. He really looked like a wide receiver and didn't really do some of the more traditional roles and responsibilities that you would attribute to a tight end. So he filed a grievance, and this went to arbitration. And ultimately, a arbiter sided with the New Orleans Saints and essentially said that, hey, although you do line up out wide and in the slot a high percentage of your snaps, that's what the tight end position is. It's a combination of lining out wide to run routes and coming in line to block. So ultimately, that request from Jimmy Graham to be designated as a wide receiver was denied. So precedent isn't really on Mike Gesicki's side, but if you look at the alignment snaps for Gesicki, he lines up out wide and in the slot a considerable larger amount or percentage of the time compared to Jimmy Graham. So again, if there was any time for the trends to stop and for maybe a tight end to win this argument, it would be Mike Gesicki, because he definitely was deployed like a slot wide receiver as opposed to a tight end. Now again, we're kind of going down the rabbit hole and kind of just looking at the possibilities, because this is a possibility. This is kind of one of the drawbacks or one of the things that comes with using the franchise tag. It'll be interesting to see again if he does actually file that grievance, because if he were to win again, he would be designated a wide receiver and he'd be eligible to receive that $18.4 million salary for the 2022 season. I don't think that the Dolphins would want to pay Mike Gesicki that much money. While he is deserving of getting an extension, I'm not sure that they're willing to open up the wallet that much. And it brings a really interesting question, because teams are allowed to remove the franchise tag from players. And, upon doing that, they become free agents and they're free to sign with any team without any constraints. This grievance wouldn't be held for months and months down the line, way past free agency, way past the draft. So again, if for some reason Mike Gesicki was to win this grievance and he gets designated a wide receiver, the Dolphins could theoretically remove the franchise tag and allow Gesicki to become a free agent, but it'd probably be at a time when most needs have already been filled. The draft players, new rookies have already been brought into facilities, and the market really wouldn't be there for Mike Gesicki. So again, I think that there definitely are some pros and cons to doing it. We don't really know what Mike Gesicki's side and his representatives are thinking right now, but that's just one of the possible, routes that placing a franchise tag on him can follow. But again, it's really early. It's just one day since the franchise tag was placed. And again, as for now, it seems like Mike Gesicki is going to be a Dolphin in 2022. Now, what does that mean for Emmanuel Ogbah? He was the other candidate to receive the franchise tag, but some comments from his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, gave the indication that the Dolphins never really were, really gave that much thought. The official numbers that came out from the NFL were about $17.6 or $17.7 million for defensive ends, which was a little lower than the initial projected number of 20 million, but again, a really steep price to pay for a defensive end edge player such as Emmanuel Ogbah. So now it looks like Emmanuel Ogbah will become a free agent. Again, I mean, there's a week to hash out a potential deal. I did find it notable that Chris Greer said that he's had more talks with Ogbah's representatives as opposed to Mike Gesicki. Maybe that's because he knew that he was going to use the franchise tag on Mike Gesicki, so he really wanted to focus on the talks with Ogbah. But here, I mean, you have a situation where you have a very valuable contributor, somebody who's really performed. He's way outperformed his deal, the 2-year, $15 million deal that he signed. And he's in a position where, he's probably going to be able to field some offers from other teams and really see what his market is worth. I also found it notable that Greer spoke a lot about, wanting to be aggressive in free agency, but finding the good value. You don't want to just overspend for players and eventually have them on bad contracts 2-3 years down the line. So it's going to be interesting to see, what the Dolphins number is for Ogbah, what Ogbah's number is for Ogbah, and what the overall market is. Because again, I'd say Emmanuel Ogbah's value is whatever the market wants to pay him. If somebody wants to pay him $20 million, I mean, that's what he's worth right there. And at this point, we don't know exactly what the Dolphins kind of line in the sand is, but that's going to be part of the continued negotiations as they kind of juggle trying to bring back Emmanuel Ogbah, as well as trying to address some other needs in free agency. But again, this is what happens with the salary cap. Sometimes you're not able to keep everybody. You have to make some hard decisions. So right now they're going to kind of let things play out and see what happens. And I figure that this was going to be the route. I mean, again, the franchise number, or the franchise tag number for tight ends was way more manageable than the number for defensive ends. And I predicted, if it comes down to one of those guys, I think the Dolphins would definitely take Gesicki at $11 million over Emmanuel Ogbah at what we now know is close to $18 million. So again, that's kind of the risk that they're taking. That's the route that they're taking in terms of this offseason, and we'll see what happens there. But at the end of the day, I think that, using the franchise tag on Mike Gesicki, you get great value for a very, very productive player. Again, I know there's questions about the fit, whether he can truly find a role in this offense. But to get one of the better pass catching tight ends, a trusted target for your young quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, for $11 million, you can't ask for more than that. And we'll see again if they're able to hash out terms on a long-term deal. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back on the other side of things, we're going to talk some combine. I know there's a lot of news in the NFL the past couple of days, but again, the NFL combine did just wrap up. There are a lot of crazy times, some really athletic players showcasing their skills out in Indianapolis. So we're going to talk about that as well as preview the start of free agency for the Dolphins. So stick with us. What's going on, and welcome back to the Dolphins In Depth podcast. The first half, we're talking about the big news, the big Dolphins news of the day. There were a lot of big news in the NFL, but the big Dolphins news of the day on Tuesday was Miami placing the franchise tag on Mike Gesicki, which will in all likelihood keep him with the team for at least the 2022 season as they work to hash out terms on a long-term deal. Like I said before, I really wanted to get into some combine talk. Again, I spent the entire week, or more or less the entire week, got to Indianapolis Monday night, left Saturday afternoon. But I spent the week, watching some of the top draft prospects, talking with them, getting to know some potential Dolphins targets. Also got to talk to Mike McDaniel, Chris Grier, some members of the organization. So it was a really, really productive week, and I wrote a lot of stories. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the coverage. But in terms of the actual combine, the event with the draft prospects and their testing and whatnot, it was a really, really crazy week for the athleticism of the future of the NFL to be showcased. There were some really, really amazing numbers in the 40, the 10-yard splits, the 3-cone, all of that. And really, I think the surprise and really what stood out to me is like the athleticism of the trench players, the offensive line, the defensive line. These guys are not usually known for their quickness, but you have Jordan Davis, a defensive tackle who's almost 6'7", 340 pounds. He's running a 4.8 in the 40. You have another defensive lineman or outside linebacker running a 4.37. I mean, like the athletes of the future are just so athletic. It's just on another level, and we really saw that. Even the crop of wide receivers that ran the 40 this year. I mean, it was the fastest 40 time for wide receivers since 2003, and really as a whole, I believe it was the fastest combine since 2003. So there's a lot of speed in this draft cycle. There's a lot of athleticism. There's a lot of guys who can really, really make an impact. And I think that was my big takeaway. Ever since the Dolphins trade with the 49ers and the Eagles, it all ultimately came down to the Dolphins getting the 29th overall pick. I know that there were a lot of fans who were probably, and rightfully so, kind of frustrated. You had an opportunity to have the 15th overall pick, and now you're picking toward the end of the first round. The perception is, hey, you're not really going to get an early impact player or instant impact player. But I don't believe that to be the case. I mean, again, this is a draft class that is not really perceived as very top heavy. The top of the draft compared to previous drafts, you don't have nearly as much star power. But I was on a conference call with NFL Network draft analyst Daniel Jeremiah a couple of weeks ago, and he said like from like 14 to 60, I mean, there's just so much talent. You can't really differentiate between, those 40 somewhat guys. I mean, just because there's so much talent. And again, I think that with that, you'll have various teams draft boards kind of stacking up different ways, and you might have some surprises in that first round. And again, there's just so much talent that in terms of the depth, that I think that at 29, you might have a scenario where somebody kind of falls to the Dolphins, who the team didn't originally expect. And, you're in a situation where you don't think you're going to get a instant impact player, but you really do. And maybe at a real position of need. I mean, even at wide receiver, there were a lot of kind of smaller school prospects who really showed out. And it looks like they're going to be, potential players on day 2 and day 3. They might not go within the first 32 picks, but they could go in the second and third round, maybe even the fourth round, and come in and really play significant snaps as rookies. I mean, we're talking about guys like North Dakota State wide receiver Christian Watson, Western Michigan wide receiver Sky Moore, guys like that. They really, really showed out in Indy. And again, they might not be first round picks, they might not be day 1 picks, but they're guys that can really step in and do some really good things because they're talented players, just maybe don't have the notoriety or maybe don't have the standing of some of the more blue chip prospects. But even if you look at the trench play, the Dolphins' top need is offensive line. There's going to be guys there. I mean, Zion Johnson is a guy that I've been talking about a lot, especially since they hired his former offensive line coach Matt Applebaum. I got the opportunity to speak with him at the NFL Combine. He's a very, very impressive young man. He just seems like the type of guy that's going to fit in with the Dolphins. When you talk about Mike McDaniel, he's a Harvard educated guy, very, very intellectual, high IQ guy. I was really surprised, and I won't say surprised, but intrigued to hear from Zion Johnson that he wanted to go to Yale growing up. He was a late bloomer in football. He said he wasn't really much of an athlete. He had a 4.0 in school. He was focused on academics. But he got into football late, when he was like 16, 17 years old. And he was a quick learner. He went to Davidson. He shined at Davidson, and then he joined Matt Applebaum in Boston College, where he ultimately became a first team all ACC selection. And he maybe had the best combine of any offensive lineman in the cycle. I mean, truly. His measurables came out pretty well. He ran a really, really strong 40 time. He did 32 reps of the bench press, which I believe led all the offensive linemen. So he was a guy that definitely came into, Indy as a fringe first round prospect, but he had a really, really strong Senior Bowl. He took some reps at center. He, stacked that with a really, really strong combine. And again, I mean, he might be a guy that doesn't even get to 29. But if he gets to 29, I think that's a really, really strong pick for the Dolphins. That's like an instant day 1 starter. Put him at one of the guard spots, put him at center. It seems like you're going to be set for the next 10 years. So again, it's not even just Zion Johnson. There's a lot of guys. Again, I think that the depth of this draft class is really, really strong. It seems like the Dolphins are going to have about 7 picks. They're going to have 2 4th-round picks. They're going to have a second and a third. I wrote about it a couple of days ago when I did my takeaways from the combine. Number 29 is not an all or nothing spot to get offensive contributor. If the Dolphins maybe even go defense and they get an inside linebacker or a pass rusher or somebody at 29, there's going to be some options in day 2 and even early day 3 to find guys who can really help out this offense, which we all know needs a lot of help. So Again, we've still got free agency, which we're about to talk about soon. But I think that Dolphins fans should really be excited about the strength of this draft class and the possibility to get some guys that look good in the Dolphins uniform and play well as well. So before we get out of here, we're going to talk about free agency. Again, 1 week to the start of the new league year. Outside of, kickoff for the NFL season, this might be a fan's, favorite time of the year because you can dream, and you can dream some more. And the Dolphins, they lead the league in cap space. So Dolphins fans, they're going to be dreaming a lot in terms of some of the guys that they can bring over to help this team get over the hump, get back into the playoffs, and man, win a playoff game for the first time in 2 decades when I was in preschool, I think. I'm going to break down some of my predictions, kind of do an outlook, look at what the Dolphins have to address and what I think will happen. Again, the Dolphins, after placing the franchise tag on Mike Gesicki, they're projected to have about $50 million in cap space. So they're going to have a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of money to keep some of their own guys, as well as bring in some guys. And I think that, I guess I would say the top priority in-house would be Emmanuel Ogbah. Again, the Dolphins decided not to use the franchise tag on Ogbah and use it on Gesicki. Drew Rosenhaus, Ogbah's agent, told a local Miami channel on Sunday that the likelihood and the expectation, and, it seems more likely than not, that Ogbah is going to see what his value is on the open market. He's going to get to field some offers. And it's always tough to see, I won't say homegrown guys, but guys that you had in your building who produced well. It's always tough to see them leave, or at least go to the open market. But that's just the nature of the salary cap era and the nature of the NFL. And I think that, we are looking at a situation or a scenario where Ogbah does field a really, really big offer. And it's one that he can't turn down. Again, this is a guy who's 28. There's potentially a likelihood that this is his last or his first and last really big payday. So his agent is definitely going to prioritize him getting the biggest deal he can get. He said that he would still keep Miami as a possible option. But edge rusher, that is a premium position in the NFL. Teams have shown that they will pay a lot of money for a guy who can get to the who can get to the passer, who can rush the passer and disrupt him. And Ogbah has shown that he can do that at a pretty high level over the last 2 years. So again, if I had to make a prediction, right now, I would say that, and again, this is not really more so insider information. This is more just kind of me looking at the layout of the market, the Dolphins' needs and how things have kind of progressed. If I had to guess, if I had to make a prediction, I would say that Ogbah walks in free agency, and that'd be a really tough pill to swallow because he was a really big part of that defense that had obviously started slow in 2021. But got things going as the season went on, whether that was rushing the passer or getting batted balls. That'd be a tough blow and a tough guy to lose. But again, anything can happen when you hit the market. And his agent did say that he would keep Miami as a possibility, but we'll see what happens. It's different when you're talking to one team as opposed to kind of hearing from other teams about what they value you at. Now, in terms of outside or outhouse or not outhouse, outside the house needs, I'll say definitely the top 2 needs for the Dolphins this offseason are offensive linemen, particularly offensive tackle and wide receiver. And, again, the franchise tag was not only a really big day for what the Dolphins did, but what other teams did. We saw some teams lock up some potential Dolphins targets. The Buccaneers put the franchise tag on Chris Godwin. The Packers locked up Devontae Adams along with Aaron Rodgers. So those guys are going to be back in Green Bay for another year. Even a guy like Cam Robinson with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I'm not sure the Dolphins would have targeted him, but he got locked up, as well as offensive tackle Orlando Brown Jr. with the Kansas City Chiefs. So there were some positions of needs and players at positions of needs who are not going to be on the market. And in a sense, it kind of, dries up the potential options for the Dolphins to target. There still are some really, really talented players, some really, really good players that the Dolphins can target and bring in with their league leading cap space. But again, the options aren't as deep as they were prior to the franchise tag. And I do think that the Dolphins will, focus in on offensive line. I don't think that the offensive line is going to be overhauled the way that many people think. Again, in talking to Mike McDaniel and talking to, members of the coaching staff, Chris Greer, they really, really are bullish on this offensive line. I mean, you have guys like Austin Jackson, Liam Eichenberg, who were high draft picks in recent years, and they don't want to give up on these guys. Whether that's right or wrong, that's how they feel. And again, I mean, they drafted them pretty high. They don't want to just throw them to the side because that's going to be viewed as them giving up on them and really give the optics that the picks were bad picks. They were the wrong picks. And they don't want to do that early. But again, I did think that McDaniel really struck a balance when he spoke to me. He said, "Hey, we think these guys are talented. We think that they can be developed. We think that they can be contributors in 2022. But at the same time," and he said, quote, "we're not going to put on blinders and think that we're okay." So again, if there's a guy who they target in free agency, who wants to come to Miami, who they think can improve this offensive line, they're definitely going to do it. And I do think that that will be a focus. A name that I've been floating for a while, a lot of people have just been floating because of a natural connection to McDaniel, is 49ers offensive guard Laken Tomlinson. He's 30 years old. He's really thrived in that system that McDaniel is seeking to bring to Miami. I don't think that you would necessarily have to break the bank for him. Definitely probably going to reach double digit millions in terms of salary, maybe 10, 11, maybe a little bit more. But if you're looking for a guy who, you want a system fit, I mean, why not? Why not bring one of your friends over? Mike McDaniel already brought some of his old colleagues in my San Francisco to Miami for his coaching staff. Why not bring some players who can plug right in and get the job done? So that's one name that I'm definitely going to be looking out for. Another one, which is definitely probably the top offensive tackle, really one of the top free agents set to hit the market, is Teron Armstead, offensive tackle from the New Orleans Saints. Again, I believe he's about 30 years old. He's had some injury concerns over the years, but when you look at, a top flight franchise left tackle, I mean, you can't ask for more than him. Again, he's probably the top offensive tackle on the market this offseason. And this is where Chris Greer has to work his magic. He has to show some guys the money. But again, I think that is a player that would really, really shore up this offensive line. You really do need some veterans on that group. I mean, it's a young group that hasn't been developed properly. And the hope is that Mike McDaniel can develop them. But you definitely want to get some veteran options that don't really need the development, can go right there, can learn the playbook, and can hold it down for a 17-game schedule. So those are two offensive linemen that I definitely have my eyes out for. Another name that I wrote down was James Daniels. He's a really pretty young guy. I mean, he was drafted in 2018, just a 4-year pro. The Chicago Bears run a zone running type offense in terms of their run game. And he's been one of the kind of the best offensive guards that you really haven't heard of. I mean, we don't talk about offensive linemen a lot, but he's been a really, really productive offensive lineman. So he's kind of one of those, low value. You wouldn't be able to, or excuse me, I'll say high value, but you wouldn't have to pay a big price for him. And you can get him at a young age and get him for years to come. I think that he's a sleeper pick, I should say, to come to Miami. The second offensive need, obviously, like I said before, is wide receiver. And again, some of the big names, the top names, were taken off the market, and Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin. So I do see this as a situation where I don't know if the Dolphins will throw out like big time money, like $20 million a year money. I could be wrong. But just kind of knowing this system and getting to learn this system, it doesn't seem like one where McDaniel or Greer are going to be really compelled to bring in a $20 million wide receiver. But again, Allen Robinson was not given the franchise tag. Chicago Bears receiver, a big body target who can make contested catches. He's going to hit the market. Do the Dolphins go after him? I'm not sure. I do tend to think that his skill set kind of mirrors Devontae Parker. I think he's a little bit smoother route runner than Devontae Parker, but he's probably the top wide receiver name. I do think that they're going to go after kind of one of the tier 2 wide receivers, and I think that you could find a lot of value and a lot of production in those guys. Two names that I have my eyes out. Two names that I have my eyes out for are Jacksonville Jaguars receiver DJ Chark and Arizona Cardinals receiver Christian Kirk. Chark had an injury-marred season. I believe he had a foot issue in 2021, so he didn't play a lot of games. But he's young, he's fast, he has size. I think he can play a couple different spots. So this is an offense that needs more dynamic playmakers. They need guys who can get down the field, who can separate, and who Tua Tagovailoa can find downfield, because we know this offense did not stretch and test teams vertically as much as they should have in 2021. Christian Kirk, I think that he'd be a great fit in this offense. And McDaniel has watched him a lot in that, being a coach in the NFC West for the past couple of years. So there's definitely a lot of familiarity there. He mainly played in the slot in 2021, but in previous years, he's played outside and inside. So there definitely is some positional flexibility, which I think McDaniel will focus on. He's young, he's fast, he's a really smart route runner. And that's really, that's what the Dolphins need. They need to add guys with Jalen Waddle and kind of take the pressure off Jalen Waddle, allow him to do more vertically. I think Christian Kirk would be a great fit. But the last thing, I guess the last prediction, and I don't know if you can call it prediction, but the last thing that I'll touch on for the Dolphins offseason agenda is Xavien Howard. We all know last year, the contract dispute, the contract resolution, and it looks like it's going to be revisited again in the coming weeks and months. Chris Grier confirmed that to reporters last week. He said that along with fixing or kind of restructuring Xavien Howard's contract last year, he made the promise that they revisit it after the conclusion of the season. And that's where we are now. He said that he's going to seek a resolution with Howard with the expectation that he's going to be a Miami Dolphin in 2022. Again, obviously there was a trade request last year, and they were able to kind of avoid really going down that path, and they were able to keep one of their best players. But this is definitely part of the Dolphins agenda, and I think that it has to be factored into any moves that they make. Again, the Dolphins do have a lot of money, $50 million projected right now. But it looks like they're going to have to make Xavien Howard one of the highest paid cornerbacks in the NFL. And it's going to be really interesting to see the timeline for that, because there are some top flight cornerbacks set to hit the market, most notably J.C. Jackson from the New England Patriots. If Jackson gets a contract that, nearly sets the market, does that force, or does that make Xavien Howard and his representatives say, hey, I want to get even more money? Do they kind of wait things out and see how this cornerback market shapes out? I'm not sure, but again, there is definitely going to be some resolution to Xavien Howard's contract after the initial restructuring in 2021, where they moved up some guarantees and they gave him some more incentives. I think that was probably one of the more notable things to come out of my week in Indianapolis. Chris Grier just flat out saying, yeah, I made a promise to Xavien Howard to address that. And now we're going to do that now. The Dolphins are definitely in the business of keeping one of their best players, as they should be. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. I've been saying it every week. It's been very, very busy on the Dolphins beat. And again, with a league-leading amount of cap space, it's going to be very, very busy in the weeks to follow. I'm off next week, so no podcast next week, but we'll be back in the week after that to recap the first week of free agency, what moves the Dolphins have made, and talk about the draft a little bit more as that quickly inches closer to us. But until then, you guys take care, enjoy the start of free agency, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.